Welcome to the Mixing Mondays podcast, episode 8.
If you're struggling with plain vocals and you want to know how you can spice it up a little bit and add a little bit more flavor and depth to them, here's a structured guide that you could pick and choose what elements you want to take and apply it to your own vocals. Take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt, because with vocals and making music, nothing is really structured. It's more about feeling. However, some of the elements that I'm about to go over, you can hear them in a lot of different genres in a lot of different music. In general, every song has a limited amount of space to work from. So you have left, right, and front to back with volume. And you can manipulate some of these elements, and I'll go over that later in this episode when we talk about reverb, flangers, and choruses, which are all different effects that we're going to go over. So within that musical space, there's a lot of room to manipulate and add in layers or ad-libs and backgrounds to your vocals. So if your song has a variation between a verse and a hook, here are some things that might help you structure how you want to lay out your vocals. So for your hook, if you want to add more thickness to your vocals, a technique some people do is doubling your vocals. To achieve this, obviously, you will need to record your lead vocal. After that, you want to repeat the same thing that you said exactly the same way and add it in right underneath it. And do that at least 4 times and then pan the backgrounds. So say you have one background, pan to the left, and say you have another background, pan to the right. Now, when the hook comes on, your hook sounds wider and sounds more full. And so with harmonies are a little bit different than recording a straight double stack. You would have to sing in a different key in order for it to mesh well with the main lead vocal. Imagine if you were playing on a piano and you're trying to build out a chord. You have your lead vocal take, which is your main vocal, and then underneath it you have different notes, except you're repeating the same lines but in different keys. And so you can also add in, say, 4 stacks of those, pan 2 hard to the left and pan 2 hard to the right. Now you have a vocal that sounds really thick and harmonized as your hook. And so with verses, I've noticed that usually the verse is a little bit more dry than the hook. So the hook might have a lot of harmonies and maybe more reverb than the verse. And with verse doubles, what I like to do as well is I usually don't have the verse doubles panned hard left and hard right. Typically, I'll keep all my doubles somewhat near the center and just turn the volume down and push them further back. So that way, everything is kind of close to the center for the verse, and then when the hook comes back in, your mix just pops out, and it sounds way more wide and way more full when the hook comes in. And this can help create motion throughout the song, so a song doesn't sound just completely stagnant, like you're just saying, reading your lyrics in all one take. And so with the verse too, another technique that I've seen people do, and I do it myself as well, is I'll tell the artist to punch in some ins and outs. And what ins and outs are essentially the same thing as vocal stacks, except they're only on specific parts of the verse that you want to emphasize. So say you want to emphasize the end of each bar, then you would go over and repeat that end of each bar and add it directly underneath the main lead vocal. And honestly, you really just got to think, if you were to perform this song, what lines would the crowds really be chanting? Those are typically the ones that you would want to stack. So aside from doubles, ins and outs, I want to talk about ad-libs. A lot of the artists sometimes really struggle with where to place ad-libs. And if I'm being honest with y'all, if you don't hear a spot where you feel like there should be something, then typically don't add anything there. However, if you do want to experiment with adding ad-libs, some techniques with that are to fill in the empty spaces after each bar. Ad-libs are mainly there to fill in space and to add in another rhythmic element behind the song. So that way you can create the depth and the illusion of the main vocals are up front, and then you have little ad-libs coming in behind you, filling in and adding in that separation from front to back. And you could play around with the texture on the ad-libs. You can either put the ad-libs in a telephone effect, which is honestly way overdone, and I hear it on a lot of different songs already. Or you could play around with delays. You could play around with adding a flanger. You could play around doing anything with your ad-lib vocals to get those to stand out from the lead vocals to create that separation. And a good example on the top of my mind where an ad-lib really adds to the vibe of the track, just listen to The Box by Roddy Ricch. Throughout the whole song, you hear the and that was just an ad-lib that Roddy Ricch had said and had copied and pasted throughout a majority of that song. So simple shit like that can really change the mood of a song and add rhythm to it. Play around with placement and feel the pocket out. Where should this ad-lib be placed? Typically, it's the end of each bar, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Ad-libs also don't have to be an exact repeat of the bar itself. They could be any type of noise. Last thing that I want to talk about is the texture of backgrounds and ad-libs. Typically, with ad-libs and background vocals, you want to manipulate them to the point where they're behind the lead vocalist. Sometimes, in rare instances, you want to push the ad-libs a little bit louder if an artist requests to have his ad-libs loud. But with ad-libs and background vocals, most of the time they have way more reverb and way more delays. Sometimes they don't, and that works. Don't take everything I say literally, because this isn't a surefire method for every single song and every single genre. These are just my suggestions if you're struggling with finding out what you could do with your vocal. With ad-libs, like I said, you can use an EQ to shape the vocals, so that way if you want a telephone effect, you need to take the low end out of someone's voice and the high end out of someone's voice to get to a very finite radio sounding frequency. We'll nerd out on frequencies on a later podcast, but for this one, I'm not going to get too into it. Other than that, though, thank y'all for watching. This is just a quick tip for y'all on this podcast. And if y'all want to mix, hit me on Instagram or email me. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one, man. Peace out.